This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this first half hour of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Voters head to the polls today in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections. Our Mark Martin joins us now with more on this story. He'll be following it for us throughout the day. Mark?
Yeah, Ephraim, today, of course, is the midterm elections, and the voters will head to the polls to determine if Republicans or Democrats retain or take control of Congress in our nation's capital and state houses around the country. More than 105 million Americans are expected to cast their ballots. Around 36 million have already done that, taking part in early voting. So what's on the ballot? On the national level, all 435 seats in the House are being voted on, as well as 35 seats in the Senate. Democrats need to win 23 seats to take control of the House, and they need 2 seats to do that in the Senate. Major issues in this election cycle include immigration and health care. President Donald Trump will spend Election Day at the White House. He held 44 rallies leading up to the midterm elections in support of the GOP. Former President Barack Obama also held rallies stumping for Democrats.
Democrats are inviting caravan after caravan, isn't that nice, of illegal aliens.
Unlike some people, I don't just make stuff up when I'm talking. I've got facts to back me up.
ABC News reported that the midterms are being called an election about everything. The author of the popular book, The Trump Prophecies, says they're the most important midterm elections in American history. And also at stake, voters in 36 states will choose a governor. And to give you an idea of how important Americans are viewing this election, we mentioned at least 36 million Americans have already voted, casting their ballots in early voting. In the last midterms at this point, that number was 20 million. Ephraim?
Well, how does the midterm turnouts compare to the turnout for presidential elections?
Well, turnouts in the midterms are traditionally quite a bit lower than presidential elections. For example, in the midterms, it's around 40% of eligible voters, whereas in presidential, it can hit as high as 60%. But one estimate had this year's midterm elections at 45% of eligible voters casting their ballots. And that's a figure that hasn't been seen in nearly half a century.
All right, a big day indeed. Thank
Yes,
you, Mark,
it
for
is.
that report. On this election day, Vice President Mike Pence tells CBN News he believes Republicans will expand their majority in the Senate and keep the House. CBN's David Brody traveled with him on Air Force Two for the final push to get out the vote. Here's David's report.
Well, but you can see it. You see the enthusiasm.
You can feel it. You can feel it.
With his wife Karen by his side, we spent the final hours of these midterms on Air Force Two with an optimistic vice president. From Montana to South Dakota.
Hello, South Dakota!
The crowds were enthusiastic, as was the VP.
The blue wave. We were just on Air Force One the other day. The president says the blue wave's dead. What's the answer on the blue wave we're hearing so much
Well, we
about?
think the blue wave's going to hit a red wall all across this country. I think we're going to expand our majority in the United States Senate.
You do.
I really believe we're going to hold the House of Representatives.
First stop, Montana, where the goal is to defeat a Senate Democrat living in big sky Trump country.
How much is John Tester in trouble here in Montana?
We think Matt Rosendale is in a great position to win this race. John Tester has been voting with the liberal agenda in the United States Senate every step of the way, voted more than 90% of the time with President Obama's agenda. That's not Montana.
Pence's final pitch to voters is pretty simple and to the point.
Think about 4.5 million new jobs created, unemployment at a 50-year low. We're rebuilding our military, constitutional conservatives being appointed to our courts. And that's exactly what the president and I told the American people that we would do. And the Democrats, by contrast, it's been an agenda of obstruction.
But Democrats are fired up and turned off by this administration's policies. Immigration is close to the top of the list.
What do you make of some of the rhetoric coming, what they say is from this administration on immigration?
We have a crisis of illegal immigration at our southern border. But this caravan that's moving north is deeply concerning to people all across this country. I hear about it every day. It's the reason why the president's made it clear that the caravan will not be allowed to enter our country illegally. And we're taking decisive steps to administratively close the loopholes that human traffickers use to exploit vulnerable families and entice them to take the long and dangerous journey north.
Motivating the faithful base is Pence's main chore.
So if you're taking notes, I need you to vote.
If Republicans do well Tuesday night, Pence is pretty clear that the nonstop effort from President Trump will be a main reason.
Even though he's not on the ballot, he's campaigned as though we were. And I think that's the reason why we've seen such energy around the country. To be honest with you, David, as I've traveled around the country, I haven't seen this level of enthusiasm since the days just before the 2016 campaign.
Whatever happens Tuesday night, Mike Pence sees a larger hand at work in the country.
There seems to have been a cultural slide, obviously, for decades in this country. And along comes Donald Trump, God using imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will. What do you make of what's happened in this country since he's become president, and how you see this divinely, providentially playing out?
Well, I believe, as every president from George Washington forward, I believed in the role of providence in the life of this nation. And I really do believe that the prayers of the American people have made a difference. And even in these divided times, I really do believe those prayers are a pathway to heal our country and continue to move our nation forward.
The nation will soon find out what direction that means for the next 2 years. David Brody, CBN News, on Air Force 2 with the Vice President.
Let's do it.
Most pundits consider this year's midterm elections one of the most important in decades, and that will have a profound impact on the U.S. And Chris Mitchell is reporting from Jerusalem now. Israelis are also considering how the midterms will affect the Jewish state.
For the past 2 years, many Israelis agree with President Trump's policies. He moved the U.S. Embassy behind me to Jerusalem. He pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and he drew closer to Israel's neighbors like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. Head out to Jerusalem's open-air market, Mahane Yehuda, and you can find that reflected among Israelis talking about the midterms.
I'm sure Israelis as a whole, probably if a poll were to be done, Israelis as a whole would probably be more in favor of the GOP doing well in these elections.
I think the Democrats are terrible for Israel.
Why?
Why? They've taken a very hard left turn, and their policies are not pro-Israel.
You can safely say, and I've been polling this since the elections, the presidential elections, Israelis love Trump. And that he's only gained in popularity here. And there are a number of reasons, both his personality, he's very blunt, and the way that he has defended Israel in the United Nations and really shaken up the United Nations with Ambassador Haley and with the policies. That's music to Israeli ears.
Pollster Mitchell Barak says Israelis favor certain candidates.
They seem to want candidates that are more pro-Israel. That tends to be Republicans. That tends to be the candidates from the evangelical community, from the South.
The question is, will Congress, beginning January 2019, will Congress provide tailwind or headwind to the president's national security policy?
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger served as Israel's liaison to the U.S. Congress and knows the importance of these elections for the House, Senate, and Israel.
We should never underestimate the power of the legislature. The legislature can provide very, very intense headwind to American presidents, which would transform an American president into a very weak personality in global politics. I trust that reflecting the majority of the American population, the coming Congress, beginning January 2019, will be as supportive of enhanced U.S.-Israel relations.
Whatever the outcome of the elections, the results will have an effect beyond the borders of the U.S. to Israel, the Middle East, and beyond. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And you can watch election coverage on our CBN News channel this evening. To find the channel in your area, simply go to CBN News website. Our election coverage will also air live on the Freeform channel at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Here now is a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN Newsroom. Severe weather across the country could keep people from the polls today. Rain, wind, and strong thunderstorms are expected to sweep across the East Coast. The Weather Channel reports the north central U.S. will see heavy snowfall and wet rain, as well as a snow mix. Recent studies found that Republican candidates tend to have a slight advantage when it rains. The U.S. Supreme Court announced Monday it will make a decision on the potential destruction of a World War I Veterans Memorial shaped in the form of a cross. In 2015, a lower court ruled the memorial was not constitutional, declaring the shape of the memorial violating the First Amendment. The American Humanist Association wants the cross to be destroyed or changed. The Supreme Court will hear the appeal on whether to reverse that decision. Armed separatists have kidnapped at least 79 students and their principal from a Presbyterian school in Cameroon. The kidnapping took place late Sunday by men who call themselves Amba Boys. That's a reference to the state of Ambazonia that armed separatists are trying to establish. The men say they will only release the children when they achieve what they want and after the children struggle. You can find these and other stories on our website, CBN News, throughout the day. Coming up, the leaders of Iran make plans to ignore newly issued U.S. sanctions. We're going to break down what it means for the country. Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. This week, the Trump administration raised economic sanctions against Iran. The new sanctions are aimed at isolating the country's banking sector and slashing its oil exports. Our George Thomas reports.
More than 24 hours after the United States slapped Iran with some of the toughest sanctions ever to hit the Islamic regime, residents of the capital city, already facing economic dire straits, are bracing for even more pain.
The sanctions have greatly affected our lives 100%.
Everything from food, transportation, housing, and medical costs have risen dramatically.
High prices negatively impact every individual and every family.
Mina Soleil, who is visiting Tehran, fears this second round of sanctions will lead to more unemployment and hyperinflation.
Prices for shoes and clothes have gone up very high, and a lot of people are not able to buy these things anymore.
Some hope the economic pain will bring Iranians to the streets to protest the Islamic regime and call for its end, as they did last year and in 2009. The White House says the aim of the economic penalties is simple.
Our objective is to starve the Iranian regime of the revenue it uses to fund violent and destabilizing activities throughout the Middle East and indeed around the world.
In all, the U.S. government has sanctioned more than 900 Iran-related targets in the last 2 years. Secretary Pompeo says the Islamic regime has a clear choice.
It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble.
Thousands of Iranians responded to the new sanctions by chanting death to America, death to Israel, and burning U.S. and Israeli flags. They even squeezed in military drills in the northern part of the country in defiance, as the government vowed to circumvent U.S. sanctions and keep selling its oil. Iran's supreme leader, speaking on the eve of the anniversary of the November 4th, 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, used the occasion to accuse Washington of waging military, economic, and propaganda wars. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei told the crowd that America's influence was in decline.
America's power and hegemony in the world is declining and moving toward destruction. It's waning year by year.
But it is America that's putting the squeeze on the regime at the moment, and the White House says that pressure will be relentless until Iran changes its revolutionary course. George Thomas, CBN News.
Still ahead, Eric Metaxas introduces us to the cast of characters in his new children's book, Donald Drains the Swamp. The work of best-selling author Eric Metaxas include both funny and serious angles for children as well as adults. Now, his latest book about President Trump embodies all of those qualities, actually. Our Jennifer Wishon met up with him in New York City.
We caught up with Eric Metaxas while he was hosting his radio show.
It's kind of scary to me, the power that Facebook has.
With his new book, Donald Drains the Swamp, proudly displayed beside his microphone. It's a tale about a character called Donald the Caveman, based on a true story.
So Eric.
Yes.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Donald the Caveman.
Yes.
It's quite a progression.
Thank you. It's not a progression. It's either a regression or nothing at all.
People, it's kind of a funny thing. I'm very eclectic. I've always been that way.
He's not kidding. The conservative Christian has written critically acclaimed biographies, more than 30 children's books, even scripts for the popular cartoon VeggieTales. And his latest book is a mashup of political humor, serious lessons about liberty, and the good things Metaxas sees happening in America under this president.
This presidency, there's something about it. He has a folk hero quality. It's like an American folk hero. Who is this guy?
Do you see this as a children's book, or do you see it as a, you know, it's good for everybody to read?
When I wrote this book originally, I was really thinking of a humor book for adults. A humor book about Donald the caveman. He drains the swamp. And there's a lot of political humor in here that's specifically for adults. Kids aren't going to get it. But if you do it just right, you do it in a way that doesn't exclude kids. You do it in a way that's sweet and innocent. This book is not nasty, it's not mean, it's meant to be lighthearted and fun.
Well, speaking of some of the adult humor in the book, there's a Georgosaurus.
The Georgosaurus, that's just a joke. We had no idea that there's a Hungarian billionaire Satan worshiper named George Soros, so make of it what you will.
There's also a blue bird that flits through the book, and as you know, birds like to tweet, so, you know, make of it what you will. Why is it following Donald around? Well, you know, that you can figure that out.
And, I mean, to be fair, there's also a turtle in here who looks a lot like the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, you know, to be really fair, and this is not a knock on turtles, but all turtles somehow end up looking like the Senate Majority Leader. It's not their fault. It's not his fault. It's just a quirk of nature.
So why did he portray the president as a caveman?
Sometimes we think he's a little bit of a caveman, this president, but he's our caveman. He's working for us. That's the key. He's working for us.
Well, I think the power of the Trump presidency is in its simplicity. The fact that he's driven so much by his gut, his boldness,
right.
That I think is portrayed here.
But that's exactly right. That's part of the issue of the caveman, right? The caveman is not self-conscious. He just does what he has to do. You know, he clubs the animal, he eats it. There's something funny about that this president is so motivated by his gut, his instincts, that it is almost funny. You don't think of him being, he's the antithesis of Obama. Obama was paralyzed by overthinking things. It was kind of a Hamlet-like paralysis. He was unable to do anything, and you thought, is he even in the White House? Is Daddy home? What is going on? Do we have a president? This president, you sort of feel just the opposite.
Metaxas is on a mission to make Americans think. Along with his best-selling books, here in New York City, he hosts a lecture series called Socrates in the City, where he and his guests tackle big issues like God, science, and culture. He understands why some voters, particularly Christians, may have to hold their noses when it comes to some of Trump's tactics.
Oh, listen, you have to understand, voting for Trump is not necessarily a vote for Trump. It's a vote for the people he's going to affect. God holds us accountable. He doesn't say, well, if you don't like this or you don't like the way he combs his hair, don't vote for him. If you don't vote for the person you think is going to do the best job, they may not be perfect, but the other person's going to get in. And I think that Christians, sometimes we feel like, well, I'm going to be really holy and I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I think God calls us to get our hands dirty. We're living in such divided times. We need to laugh. We need to be able to celebrate the good things that are happening. So that's why I wrote the book.
And this isn't Donald the Caveman's only adventure. Look for Donald Builds the Wall, even Donald Goes to Space, coming soon. He hopes this latest book winds up under lots of Christmas trees this year, so more Americans better understand the importance of draining the swamp. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, New York City.
And Donald Drains the Swamp is available right now wherever books are sold. Stay with us. We'll be right back with much more of CBN NewsWatch straight ahead. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch right now. It is time for your Tuesday Tweetable. Here's a message I hope you will find uplifting and certainly hope you'll be encouraged to post, to tag, to tweet, and to share this message with others. This moment in your life is not the end. I don't care how bad or good it may feel in this moment. Guess what? God has so much more, so much better in store for you. There's a song that says it all. Better days are coming, and they indeed are. Remember that God causes all things to work together for your good, so long that you love Him and you are called according to his purpose. With that word, I strongly encourage you to make this a terrific Tuesday. Remember that you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. If you're watching us here on the CBN News channel, there is much more of the CBN NewsWatch program coming up right after this short break. For all others, we want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Certainly hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a terrific Tuesday, and remember the news continues 24/7 at cbnnews.com. We're updating it all day this election day. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.